Hostility and repression bound amongst two communities, the Israelis and Palestinians, a struggle for power and battle between two religions, an intractable conflict never seeming to end. Brought to you live by the BBC News, the religious roots of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The land of Palestine, or Israel, finds itself in the middle of a well-known conflict based around religious claims, being regarded as holy land for Jews, Muslims, and Christians, guarding access to Syria, Lebanon, the Mediterranean, and Egypt. Ever since the end of the Second World War, 3 major wars had taken place. The country is almost at a constant level of terrorism, with a record of numerous political assassinations, and the failure of either superpower to bring peace to the region.
Despite the frequency of incidents, it may be better to focus on the conflict as a whole than of the region's never-ending violence. So to understand things, let's take a quick trip through the history.
Jews trace their occupation to approximately 1000 BCE, where they lived until Romans expelled them around 135 CE and destroyed what was known as the Second Temple. The Muslims occupied the region from the 7th century as the Arabian Empire permeated throughout Middle East and North Africa. Prior to World War I, the area had been controlled by Turks, although they were considered by locals as conquerors. Various groups that wanted Israeli and Arab independence emerged, but instead of fighting each other, they had a common adversary, the Turks. As a result, they coexisted somewhat peacefully. The land of Palestine was inhabited by a multicultural population. As such, almost everyone agrees that prior to World War I, there is almost no hostility between Jews and Palestinians.
However, with Turkish Empire falling apart and persecution of Jews in Europe increasing, both groups began developing plans to make Palestine their homeland.
Britain encouraged the Arabs to organize and revolt against the Ottomans, promising them an Arab homeland.
Yet around the same time, British Foreign Secretary Arthur James Balfour gave official support to Britain's Jewish community to establish a national home for Jews. So, there we go. By the end of the war, control of the region had been passed to Britain as a mandate under the terms of League of Nations. In the following years, Britain struggled to maintain peace between both sides. As for one, the Arabs were resentful of British betrayal and massive increase of number of Jews during interwar period. Secondly, the Jews were fearful of the British destroying their interest of establishing a national homeland, only convert Palestine to a land for Arabs. So for the next 30 years, both sides made the effort of establishing networks for their new nation.
While the Arabs fought against the Turks, the Jews went for mass immigration, a result of 2 world wars, the Nazi Holocaust, and pressing anti-Semitism or Jewish persecution in Europe. Then in 1947, the UN and Britain finally got around to allowing the Jews and Palestinians to establish their own nations. Consequently, fighting broke out, and by 1948, Britain had left and been replaced by the State of Israel. Before we take a step further, let's take a closer look at the more biblical causes that served as propellers of the conflict and justifications of the migrating Jews. The theological differences between Judaism and Islam? Is it a problem regarding whether or not the most important prophet descended from Abraham's son Isaac or Ishmael? Israelis and Jews around the world consider themselves to be descendants of biblical Jews, known as Hebrews. Palestinians, on the other hand, regard themselves as descendants of all the ancient people of the area, including Hebrews, Canaanites, and Philistines. Elections for the 37th World Zionist Congress are about to take place in another week. It is important to note that this governing body is historically important to Israel, as it started functioning as a Jewish government long before there was an actual state of Israel. So, what is Zionism? How did it affect the origin of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict? And what about Israeli politics today? The term Zion is associated with the city of Jerusalem, the sacred land to Israel that has inspired countless pilgrimages from displaced Jews seeking their return to Zion. Around the dawn of the 20th century, immigration to Israel was especially popular because of a growing Zionist political movement, created by Theodor Herzl, believing that all Jews belonged to a single nation. And according to the Torah, God took Abraham, who with so much faith in God, left his community to travel to Israel, where God reassured Abraham, I will bless you, and make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. In the words of the Bible, on the same day the Lord made a covenant with Abraham, saying, to your descendants I have given this land. So to the Jews, the Jewish right to the land were always a part of the fabric of creation God had promised Abraham. Herzl published a pamphlet on the subject, known in English as the Jewish State. Then he organized the world's first Zionist Congress in 1897 to discuss homeland options. During the next few decades, Jewish states were proposed in places such as Alaska and Uganda, but Jerusalem and Palestine area was the area that held the most significance to Jews. In 1917, British located Jewish state in Palestine, and after the Holocaust, many other countries supported it as well. Rising anti-Semitism and Jewish persecution in the 1900s is the core reason to why Jews needed a homeland, and why countries like the USA sympathized with the Jews. Yet the reason to why they moved to Palestine is because of Zionism. British involvement from the First World War also served as a catalyst, lighting the bonfire, and the Arabs, with a strong desire for self-determination, were not happy with fleeing Jews taking over their land. So in regards to the origin of the conflict, Zionism, or rather religion in this case, is the foundation to why Jews immigrated to Palestine, but anti-Semitism and a fight over land is more of a root cause.
These borders largely reflect the outcomes of two wars. One wage in 1948 when Israel was established, and another in 1967, commonly known as the Six-Day War.
For the Palestinian Arabs, the two conflicts had been a disaster, as well as the 300,000 refugees who had fled their home in the first half of 1948. Their entire population now divided between Transjordan, Egypt, and Israel. They used the phrase Or-Nakba, the catastrophe, to describe it. Approximately 700,000 Arabs fled their home and went mostly to the West Bank, Gaza Strip, Jordan, Syria, or Lebanon. According to the United Nations, a refugee is a person who, owing to a well-founded fear of being persecuted, is outside the country of his nationality.
How do people become refugees? People become refugees through conflicts and wars where people are forcibly displaced from their homes or flee to safety. In normal circumstances, their living conditions can be horribly degraded.
750,000 displaced human beings are dependent upon charity for their very existence. This is one of dozens of camps in which these refugees huddle in squalor. All are overcrowded, jammed with men, women, and children who have no place to go, no place except the desert, no home.
Yet with over more than a century gone, have living standards for these people in any way improved since the day they were barred from ever returning to their homes? As you can see, the countries where some of these refugees now live have passed discriminatory laws against them almost since the beginning of their arrival.
Hello, how are you? Can you tell me how it's going for you and what's the situation right now?
It's very bad. It's like a dump, and even the tents are rotting. There are usually 6 or more families living in a room with only hanging blankets to offer privacy.
So why and how you live? And were you well prepared or?
The soldier told us that they would defeat the enemies in a few hours, then we could return.
So, do you still want to return to homeland?
We deserve to have the right to return. But I don't feel like to return.
What about you, little child? Do you want to go back to Palestine?
No, I don't like wars.
Again, both sides won't come to an agreement. From the start, the Palestinians were dealt with differently than all other refugees. While all others came under the administration of the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, the Palestinians received their own relief organization, the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestinian Refugees.
Yet, the reality is, no one wants to admit it or publicly support it. Why won't Arab, the Palestinian authorities, and of our nation hosting this PR take ownership of these refugees? Does it have to do with religious discrimination? With 30,000 employment, it's not a problem of ours to solve it out of the extent. Or are our countries keeping the issue alive to divert attention from their own internal problem by remaining everyone of Israel aggression?
The truth, as we believe, is that the goal was never really to solve the Palestinian refugee crisis. With the Arabians, they are only a means of criticizing Israel. Even the United Nations has no control or power over resettling the refugees. The Arabian viewpoint is that these refugees have to be led into Israel again, so they can claim back their land. Israel, of course, will never ever agree to such terms in any peace talk, because with the additional 7 million Palestinians, Jews will be hopelessly outnumbered.
Speaking of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, we will often hear on the news that the Israeli settlements and Jewish settlers are major tipping points. But what exactly are they?
Israeli settlements are communities built for the Jewish public on occupied Palestinian land. Due to the small Jewish population, Israel says they need them for security.
However, according to the international law, here's the problem. The residential areas are illegal. In detail, these really good-looking suburbs have actually violated the 4th Geneva Convention under the laws of UN for the following reason.
For the 4th Geneva Convention, outlining protection issues of civilians in the midst of a war, forbids states from transferring their citizens to the occupied land. But that's exactly what Israel has been doing since it occupied the West Bank in 1967. By building these illegal settlements, it is evident that Israel is trying to ensure it retains possession of that land, using it as an advantage during peace negotiations, and that is the key reason to why peace talks keep falling apart. Since the beginning of the Oslo negotiations in 1993, the number of Jewish settlers occupying Palestinian land has actually doubled to 500,000. And despite the effort Israel made in 2005 by retreating its occupying troops and settlers, Israel maintains a full blockade of the territory.
Well, what exactly is driving so many Israelis to break the law and live in Palestinian territory?
Well, many settlers go out of the religious conviction that it is their biblical right to be there. But religion aside, the government has definitely been encouraging settlement by offering lower tax rates, subsidized housing, and easier loans. And although they are technically living deep inside West Bank, which belongs to Palestine, infrastructure has been built to directly connect them to Israel. The Israel army is heavily deployed to protect these settlements. Over 200 kilometers of road had been built on Palestinian land for the exclusive use of Jewish settlers, with hospitals, schools, and even a college built only for them.
Chiefly, after all the problems found for both Palestinian refugees in neighboring Arab states and the conditions of Palestinians degraded by Jewish settlers, it's easy to understand that.
While the Arabs are purposely using the Palestinian refugees to their advantage as a barrier to peace, the Israelis are moving more and more Jewish settlers into West Bank to secure their position, and argue there is no more land for Palestinians during peace negotiations too. Apparently, both crises seem to relate to land and security more than religion. Enough about how religion is so thrown out the window. I'm now going to introduce you to all to the crucial issue that is the heart to making the Israeli-Palestinian conflict intractable. Jerusalem, being one of the oldest cities in the world, resonates in the hearts of Christians, Jews, and Muslims alike, and echoes through centuries of shared and disputed history. When we talk about Jerusalem as a focus of Jewish longing for 2,000 years, what we are really referring to is an area that covers about 620 acres, merely 2% of the total area of modern or municipal Jerusalem. So, what is Jerusalem's religious importance to the three monotheistic religions? Originally, there is a hill, called by the Bible as Mount Moriah, and at the top of the hill there is a rock. And this in Judaism became to be known as a stone and foundation, because all the beginnings were linked to this rock. In Jewish tradition, from this rock the world was created, Adam the first human was created, and on the stone Abraham brought his son Isaac for the sacrifice. All the beginnings of mankind and the Jewish people relate back to this rock. Known to the Muslims as the Dome of Rock, it is here that Prophet Muhammad ascended to heaven. Around the year 20 or 19 BC, the mighty King Herod, king of Judea, wants to rebuild the temple, and to make it nicer than ever before. He has a problem. He wants a larger base to build a larger temple, but in order to do that, he could either cut down the mountain, flatten it, but then he will lose the stone of foundation, the reason for building the temple. So King Herod instead builds huge retaining walls all around the mountain, known today as the Sacred Kotel Wall. On them, he now has a larger platform of 35 acres. Basically, before Camp David and the presentation of the Clinton Principles for Jerusalem in 2000, there was no real progress ever in any of the formal negotiations. Clinton's principles were basically as such: what is Jewish to Israel and what is Arab to the Palestinians? Apparently, what the fundamental truth revealed, that sovereignty is linked to the territory, and that the sides must agree to the legal division of the territory. There was acceptance on both sides for the Palestinian neighborhoods to go to Palestine and the Israeli neighborhoods to go to Israel. Then came the central question: what about Temple Mount? What about the Old City? In the end, various experts found solutions to all of the problems and proposed possible technical ones, save the religious one. The Palestinians wanted to divide the historical basin as shown in the map. Israel proposed internationalization of the area. This is a significant point of disagreement existing to this day concerning the holy site. Solutions can only be met by resolving the conflict. Problem is, the Israelis fear Palestinian control on top that would allow them to prevent Jews from conducting peaceful prayers at the Kotel. The Palestinians, on the other hand, believe that Israel has been digging underneath Temple Mount for years, making the Holy Mosque collapse one day, and that the idea of internationalization is a conspiracy with Americans. They were not to be trusted. Today, intifadas have still erupted, resulting in horrific carnages, reminding both sides of the issue. Well, what will you do to settle the conflict?
We will do everything we can to get back with what belongs to us. We will carry on talking with the Israeli government. We all have been hoping to have a peaceful settlement and a fair solution. Neither the government nor civilians like wars.
What makes your resolution so firm then?
It's those refugees, they need a safe place to live, and every one of them wants a legal identity for and what the most important things for all of our peoples. But Israel has taken all of the water resources.
Then what exactly do you want now?
So many problems were caused by Israel. The only thing we want is that our land occupied by Israel can be back.
Hamas is designated as a terrorist group by Israel, the US, and Europe. It refuses to renounce violence or recognize Israel. Fatah, meanwhile, long ago renounced violence and recognized Israel as part of efforts to broker a lasting peace. While Fatah renounced armed struggle against Israel, pursuant to the Oslo Accords, Hamas initiated a long campaign of suicide bombings and other attacks on Israelis. Fatah hoped that agreements with Israel would end the occupation and establish an independent Palestinian state. Hamas opposed the agreements and refused to recognize Israel. That's also the reason to why Israel refuses to work with Hamas. Nevertheless, to many in Palestine, Hamas is a perfectly legitimate resistance movement, therefore encouraged to support Hamas, the reason to their power today. Hamas was founded as a paramilitary wing of the Muslim Brotherhood, therefore its roots, mission, and ideology have been explicitly linked to Islam. Islam to Hamas has not only been a religion which guides its organizational aims, but also a source of lore to be introduced into the future Palestinian state. However, it is not religion that is causing its violence. It can be argued in the case of Hamas that Islam was only incorporated into the strategy of the violence for resistance to gain support. People are used to Islam being the center of Hamas' work, and therefore deviation from Islam in political behavior would lead to Hamas to a compromising gap and loss in supporters.
The security of Israel, preventing a nuclear Iran, and ending the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.